Investing 2015, the big picture. The flow of this webinar would be like this. I'll give a talk for about 40 or 45 minutes, and then we have questions over the rest of the time. Investing happens to fulfill our goals. Our goals keep expanding with time. We expect our investment to fulfill them. As our goals grow and expand, we need to ensure our investments grow ahead of them and fulfill them. Only if our investments grow ahead of our goals will we ensure that our goals are met in due time. Invest to beat inflation. You would have heard this whenever we talk investments. This is the most basic investment goal. From experience, we have found that most failed investing has to do with investment choices. Investors fail to reach goals despite making several significant investments. Successful savings can still lead to failed investing. We know instances of that. The reason for investment failure or failed investing is evident. It is a failure of investment choice. Investors pay limited attention to investment choice. Even when they entrust their investing to others, they fail in making the choice. One must ensure that you make the right investment choices. From my experience, the best investment choices are always against the popular trend. Contrarian investing is rarely practiced and yet is one of the most successful ways to make the right investments. Maximizing returns is a natural outcome of making right investments and giving them adequate time. Once we manage to maximize our returns, that ensures that our future becomes financially safe. Once we achieve the goal of making our future financially safe, we start looking further. We have enough to do whatever we wish. That is the ultimate financial goal. We call it financial freedom. Attaining financial freedom is essentially a destination. We find that after attaining financial freedom, people even give it all away. A classic example is Warren Buffett. But most of us look towards financial freedom as the ultimate goal. Did you know one of the worst kept investment secrets? All asset classes do not beat inflation all the time. Asset classes lag inflation for long years, and they beat inflation significantly in very short bursts of time. Now, what is the duration of this burst of time? Typically, it is 3 or 4 years. So, when we invest in an asset class matters. You have in this pie below 4 asset classes that I have mentioned: land, equity, gold, and insurance. These are typically asset classes that we do invest in. When we invest in these asset classes matters so much to the outcome. So let us try and analyze how these asset classes are presently placed. I'd like to do a quick poll and I will just request you to answer them. Here's the first one. How many of you think that equity is very expensive now? I'd request you to just click your choice among the 2 options. The first option, yes, it is expensive. The other one is no, it is not. I request you to click your choices. Once you complete that, we'll go to the next poll, which is again a short poll. How many of you think that real estate is expensive now? Yes, it is expensive is one option, and no, it is not expensive is the other. I request you to quickly complete your poll. I'll give you the time and then we'll move on to the presentation. You still have a few of you to fill in your polling, and once you're done with that, we'll move with the next part of the presentation. We still have 4 participants to poll. Once you poll, we move with the presentation. If you're not made your choices, I request you to make it choices. I request those who are joining the webinar now to quickly poll so that we can move on. The jury seems divided on the question. How many of you think that equity is very expensive now? And it seems evenly divided. Interestingly, we find an overwhelming mandate saying that real estate is expensive now. Now let us go to the next slide, which is an overview of 3 asset classes that I've covered. I take you through a dollar chart of gold. Just have a look at this chart. This is the dollar chart of gold from 2009 to 2014. Once you see this graph, where do you think gold is headed now? Typically, gold underperformed for a long period of time prior to 2009 and failed to beat inflation for a very long period of time. Subsequently, over a short burst of 3 years between 2009 and 12, gold peaked at $1,900 per ounce. Now, I played gold through the ETF route. My holding period was 3 years between 2009 and 12, and I'm out of it. Indian investors have mostly invested a bulk of their money between 2011 and now, and look at the trend. So people are continuously buying gold at a time when it is weakening in dollar terms. Now this is something that one needs to ponder over. Look at the other graph on the right. It is a chart of real estate in a prominent suburb of a prominent locality in South Chennai. This is a graph that goes a long way back from 1997 right up to the current price. You will find that there is a price chart around 1,000 rupees to a square feet between 1997 and 1999 or 2000, and then it starts moving up. Now the interesting part is that in 2001 there was a guideline revision. Therefore, this chart between 97 and 2000 is not a fair indicator of the market price, whereas the market price from 2000 to 2007, which is a flatter graph, is a fairer indication. Overall, for a long period of 7 or 8 years, the graph was flat. So real estate failed to beat inflation between 1997 and 2005, and then look at where it went. Now, the question we need to understand is, between 2007 and now, real estate has beaten inflation by miles, no question about it. But do you expect this graph to maintain an ascendant, or is there a possibility of a descendant, or in a best case scenario, a long period of flat markets? Now, this is something that investors need to clearly understand, assimilate before they make asset choices. Now, let us look at equity, which is the third asset class that I'm going to cover. Getting the timing right in equity has been a major problem for investors. I would think the culprit in this is the index or the sensitive index or the Sensex or the Nifty. Investors are deeply anchored in the value of the index. So when the index rises above previous highs, people think equity is overvalued. Most people either sell equity or fail to invest when they should simply not do it for this reason. Investors should not anchor themselves to the valuation of the index. Instead, they should anchor themselves to the earnings of the index. It's not the value of the index, but the earnings of the index which one should anchor yourself to. That is the only way to succeed in equity, and that is what I'm going to show you in this chart. So how do valuations of companies look in relation to their earnings? The valuations tell you a very different story. Now look at the chart on top. You will find that the earnings of the Sensex was flat between 1996 and 2003. It failed to beat inflation. It was 250 rupees to a share and it went up to 272. You see that orange arrow that points to that phase when there was hardly any growth in the earnings of the Sensex. And then from 2004, it started moving up to 2008, and that explains the bull run of 2008. Now, though the earnings grew significantly, the markets went far ahead of the earnings, and this is what happened in 2008. Now, you see the Sensex forward P, which is there right below you in another chart. You will find a peak of 24.6 times earnings. While the earnings grew, the value of the Sensex grew far ahead of the earnings. Now, what one needs to anchor yourself to in this situation is that from 2008 to 2014, the Sensex has still continued to grow its earnings, and you are expecting earnings in 2015 to the region of 1476. You see the green arrow and the last value that's mentioned on the top chart. And the Sensex has basically just beaten its peak of 2008. Now, the growth in the earnings far outpaces the growth in the Sensex. So the valuation per se, if you anchor it to the earnings, is not very expensive, and that's what the graph indicates. The 10-year average of the Sensex is 15.3 times its 1-year earnings, and now it's more or less near that point. But there is one point that you need to factor in, and that is the economy of India is at its lowest point of growth. Now, what one should now clearly evaluate is whether we will see a gradual return of growth. If you do see a gradual return of growth, it's only likely that the earnings of the Sensex will accelerate. And if the earnings of the Sensex will accelerate, you will find that suddenly the markets will become much cheaper compared to its historic valuations. And that is what one should evaluate now. But the point that I am trying to make here is that every asset class has its own unique rhythm, and they don't exactly behave in a linear fashion. So if we think that every year if you buy a particular asset class, irrespective of where that asset class is in its investment cycle, we could be horribly wrong. And that is what seems to be happening to investors in gold and real estate today. And that is exactly what happened to investors between 2008 and now in equity. So where are we in the investment cycle? And I'm going to take you through something that I've learned. Now this is a cycle about when you buy and when you sell. So where are we in this cycle? And you have 6 points in this cycle from A to F. And let's start with A, which is the highest point in the cycle. Here, everybody wants to sell at the top, and most sell when it's too late, or at probably point B or point C. Now, the stock markets are definitely not at the point A today in terms of earnings. They were between point B and C for a very long period of time. Now, that was the best time to start looking at equity at the point C, when it's the best time to buy, but people want to buy at the cheapest price, which is D. Now, that phase has been crossed clearly. D is theoretically the best time to buy, but it's difficult to execute due to low volumes and fear. Today, one finds that the volumes in stocks is increasing and the swift movement in the prices of stocks is nothing but the hunt for volumes. We are somewhere between D and E. Theoretically, buying before markets rise is best at point E, and it's difficult to execute because volumes are still low and there is fear. So people end up buying after the market has gone to F. Now, to my mind, given the current construct of the stock markets, if there is an election-related euphoria, we would quickly move from point E to F. And that will get accented or accentuated if there is a delay in the monsoon, some kind of a negativity that could come because of agricultural production falling or geopolitical considerations. So, when we invest is something that we should clearly understand. The game is all about playing the cycles right. Every asset has a cycle and you must play that cycle right. In my assessment, gold has had its best part of the cycle and the same applies to real estate. I am not of the view that equity has had such a move yet. So the art of winning the investment game is to chase the low. While we may not get the lows of the recent years again in equity, you still will find higher lows and one should chase them. If you had missed the absolute lows in an asset cycle, it makes no sense to chase an asset as it nears its highs. But is equity really nearing its highs? I don't think so, not yet. And we could see a clear trend coming probably post-war. But the basic truth that one should understand is every asset class follows this rule of going from a boom to a slump and then having a recovery. Where are we in this graph? Today we are probably putting the recession behind and gradually heading out of the slump and into a recovery. You will agree with me that the boom is still far away. So let us now try and spot some of the economic trends. I'd like to talk about the negatives first because factoring in negatives is the most important part getting your investing right. GDP growth is at its lowest in a decade. The fiscal deficit is again at a decade high. The government has lied to us in the vote on account, and the next government would have to tell the truth and come out with a barrel on the fisc. So the next budget is going to be bitter pill. Domestic investments in mutual funds is negative over the past 12 months. Indian investors have shown no confidence in equity or in our economy. FIIs have invested 51,650 crores in the last 12 months. It has been a thumping thumbs up to Indian equity. Corporate profit growth is at its slowest since 2009. Now, if you look for evidence in the current performance of the economy, you may not find them. And last, we are headed into an El Nino year, which means that we could see disturbances in the economic growth. Now to the positive trends. After a very long time, we have seen reforms return in 2013 and it has been forced upon us. CAD seems more manageable. When I talk of CAD, it's about the current account deficit. The investment cycle is set to revive post-election. People are still waiting and watching what kind of a government comes to power in the country and what kind of investment climate they would usher in. From all available indicators, things can only get better on this front. But FDI has seen robust flows. Despite the uncertainty of elections, long-term multinational companies have invested aggressively over the last one. You see a lot of French companies coming in, and you also have existing listed companies like Hindustan Lever, GlaxoSmithKline, and Glaxo Pharma raising their stakes significantly. We also have a recent announcement from Diageo to raise its stake in United Spirits to majority, paying a significant sum of money. Another indicator of trends is the kind of momentum that you see in mergers and acquisitions. And I think the Sun Pharma Ranbaxy merger is a clear indication of growing corporate confidence, and we will see more and more M&A deals, particularly in emerging businesses like telecom and technology companies. PE activity, what the private equity are doing is another trend indicator, and one sees heightened activity in what I call as PIPE deals, private investment in public entities. Listed companies are seeing private equity players buying stocks in the market and raising their stakes significantly. These are indications of positive expectations of the economy. And last positive trend that I see is that we seem headed for a much clearer political mandate than we thought at the beginning of this year. Politics and economics. Is politics really connected? The stock market has made much of the Narendra Modi phenomenon, but I would not like to anchor this discussion on Narendra Modi per se. What I would like to show is the behavior of the stock market in the event of a clear political mandate. And if you look at what happened in 1996, you had the United Front government, which was basically an unclear mandate. 6 months before the election, the markets knew this, so it didn't do much. And after the elections, the markets went down. So 6 months after the election, the markets did go down. 1998 was again an unclear mandate. The market clearly knew that no clear mandate was coming. It went down significantly before the elections and marginally after the elections. So the 6 months before the election and the 6 months after the election were difficult phases for the stock market. The market didn't like political uncertainty. 1999 was the year the NDA got a clear mandate. Markets got wind of it before the elections and continued to cheer it after the elections. You will note that it moved 50%. It moved about 25% before the elections and about 20% or more after the elections. Clearly, it got wind of the clarity in a mandate and it cheered it. 2004 was a difficult time. I think the markets expected the return of the NDA before the elections, and it did go up before the elections, but the mandate was not what the market wanted, and it didn't like it after that. The fact that the left had a big say in economic policy was something the market did not relish. 2009 again was a surprise mandate. The market did not expect a clear mandate, so it did not show much enthusiasm in the period before the elections. The 6 months before the elections were negative, and when the UPA did get a clear mandate, the market ran away. And you will remember on the day of the result itself, the market ran away. This election again started with expectations of an unclear mandate, and as we move over phases of polling, there is an increasing expectation that you will have a clear mandate, and that mandate is likely to be more towards the NDA. Now, if this happens, then it's quite likely that the market will behave predictably. If you notice, in the 6 months prior to the election, the market has run up close to 20%, and we are almost seeing a repetition of 1999. Now, what happens after the election depends upon the clarity in the mandate. With this kind of volatility that we see, one should have a clear approach to investing, right? During the highs of an asset cycle, we need to conquer greed. During the lows of an asset cycle, we need to conquer fear. To manage greed and fear, it's very easy to say that you need to manage greed and fear, but to manage greed and fear, you need a mind and a method, and it should be in the right place. So one should pursue the method and practice it. But this is something that can be done by understanding where assets are in the cycle, staying away from them when the cycle is not in favor, and going towards assets where there is a lot of fear and the cycle is likely to move in favor subsequently. But investors tend to do exactly the opposite, and that is why the investing doesn't work out right. And despite saving significantly, we end up not achieving our investment goals. We are again seeing equity cycles revive, asset cycles in gold and real estate probably correct, and this is the time to recalibrate and conquer greed where it has to be conquered, and conquered fear where we need to do it. The case for equity. I'm not one of those who thinks that equity valuations are cheap today. As I showed you in an earlier graph, it's more or less near the 10-year average. So equity valuations are neither cheap nor expensive. A mere electoral mandate is not what I think is the case for equity. I'm not one of those who thinks that you must invest because Narendra Modi or the NDA will come to power. The bet lies on the return of GDP growth. Our GDP growth is at its slowest and it can go only one way from here, and a strong government will definitely help matters. When the GDP growth returns, the corporate earnings or the earnings of the Sensex will expand much faster, and we expect earnings to grow faster over the next 3 years. Why do we expect earnings to grow faster over the next 3 years? Because companies presently carry much lower levels of debt on their books compared to what they did in 2008. You will remember that in 2008, the stock market gave 50,000 crore to companies which required very heavy capital like power, infrastructure, roads and stuff like that. These companies went on to add much higher levels of debt based on the equity that we invested in. So not much has happened in these sectors in these 5 years, but one thing is that the better companies have lowered their debt. In other sectors, companies are much leaner and more restructured. You will find that companies have used profits, repay debts, rather than expand capacities aggressively. The lessons of 2008 is weighing on several companies. What we see in corporate India is a hunger for scale. Earlier, we used to think that only one or two big corporates had hunger for scale. Today, consolidation is the name of the game. The Tata Group went out into the world to make acquisitions. At the time they bought Tetley or JLR, we thought it was too aggressive for an Indian company, or even Chorus for that matter. But the success of JLR and Tetley has catapulted the Tata Group into a big player in consolidation. And a classic example is Tata Motors today, which is a company whose business fortunes rest more outside India than in India. Another company which is very prominent in its global footprint is Sun Pharma, and you have seen this Ranbaxy deal, which is going to catapult it into a very big global player. Bharti Airtel again went out and expanded aggressively into the world, and now it's in the process of consolidating. Another company which is really going towards having global presence in its products, definitely it has product competency, is Bajaj Auto. HDFC Bank is one of the most profitable banks in the world, and it has been growing its profits and focusing on profit-driven growth. Now, you will notice that when I talk of emerging global players today, I'm not even talking of the market leaders of 2008. We don't even have one company in this list that was really a big market leader. Maybe Bharti and HDFC participated at a secondary level. The companies that led the stock market historically post liberalization are struggling, consolidating. But the good news is that you're having a number of aggressive companies with much better corporate governance, which are ready to consolidate, grow, and bring a strong market leadership to the Indian stock market. It's no more a one group or one company stock market. The kind of depth that you're going to get in the coming years is definitely going to surprise all of us, and you're going to have not just these names, but probably several names get added to the list of global Indian companies. So we see Indian equity clearly gaining confidence and outperforming gold and real estate. So the case for equity is definitely strong. The bet is on return of growth. The bet is that Indian companies will carry their vision to the next level. They are very well placed to do that. Debt is very low, and companies are much leaner and more restructured, and they have the capacity to take on risks and manage them much better, given that they have gone through the most volatile phase in the global economy and come out of it reasonably well. So, should an investor's strategy be? Before we go to that, let us have one more quick poll. Alright, here's a poll for you. Let us understand what you have done in this phase. How many of you have invested in equity in the year 2014? Understand our own behavior with respect to equity as an asset class. We still have some of you not polling, so I request you to poll so that we could move towards the concluding part of our presentation. We still have 5 more participants to fill in. If you can just fill in your choices, we'll move on. But one thing is evident that quite a few of you have invested in the year 2014, which essentially indicates that there is some shift in our preference towards equities. So what should our strategy be going forward? And I'm going to talk about the ITHOT strategy. What we have been advocating and practicing is that we would buy into every dip. Our focus has clearly been on investment valuation. We have bought beaten down sellers, invested systematically, and we build investors' portfolio through consistent allocation of money. I have seen that a lot of investors in the last 5 years have failed to invest because at the end of every year, they evaluated their returns in the stock market and found that they didn't make returns which beat inflation. Now, by the same logic, one can't be buying gold or real estate, or if you see the returns of the past 2 years, but that's not what investors are doing. They're still buying them. The point is, equity returns follow a certain pattern and they don't give you a linear return year on year. What essentially happens in equity is that you have no returns for a few years or very low returns, and then over a period of 2 or 3 years, returns grow geometrically over time. Of course, we still have the prospect of the best year being followed by the worst, but that's the equity market. The whole intent is to prepare for that best year, and when the markets think that there is no asset but equity to invest, we should be withdrawing from equity. So the focus should be on the next bull run and how one should maximize the equity exposure of ours in the run up to the bull run. Now, it would be vain to think that the mere change of government will usher in a bull run. I would be suspicious of such bull runs because the economic fundamentals should support a bull run, and you should have high GDP growth to support a bull run. Now, at the moment, I don't see that happening immediately. So, whatever euphoria we could have around the elections deserves to be skirted with maturity, and we should focus on valuations, and the dips subsequently should be used to buy. There always will be beaten down sectors which have good long-term prospects. We should buy them. A classic example is the contrarian investing that we have done in banking and in IT in recent times, and much earlier in pharma and FMCG when nobody was buying them, and also in value funds in recent months. Now, that is exactly what we would continue to do. We see such opportunities being thrown at us from time to time, and it's our responsibility to lap them up. Importantly, one should maximize equity exposure over a period of time, which means over the next couple of years. What we need to ensure is the time in the market, and only that will generate outlier returns. from the annual mindset that we have been carrying and comparing equity with FDs, we should move towards a investment horizon of 2 to 3 years. We'll probably spend 2 years ramping up and increasing our equity exposure, and the third or fourth year should see us generate outlier returns. An important thing is all these points are something that are part of our investment philosophy, and we believe in constantly imbibing this, growing this, fine-tuning this in constant evaluation of what is happening around us. When the world changes, we should gradually change with the world, but keep our philosophy in place. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and now we'll move to interaction. You could come up with your questions, and I will try to answer them. You could type your question in the box below, and I would be happy to answer you. Which sector do you see potential now? There are several sectors, and the first question is from Krishna Kumar. Which sector do you see potential now? We see a number of sectors seeing good potential. One, obviously, if there is a return on GDP growth, banking should benefit. The better run banks will, not the public sector banks. You will see the technology sector continuing to perform well. But two spaces where I see very big potential going forward are manufacturing, typically automobile and light engineering. You'll see a revival, and I also see a definite scope of revival in infrastructure and capital goods, which has been much depressed for a very long period of time. Thank you, Krishna Kumar. If there are any other questions, please feel free to type them. They're getting more questions, and as they get typed and completed, I'll give you names and answers. Which sectors or group of stocks do you think have reached high valuations and need to be exited and money moved to undervalued sectors? I would think that the consumption story is a little stretched. Vikas is asking that question. Vikas, the answer is that the consumer space looks overvalued to me, and the reason for this overvaluation is the underperformance in other sectors and the uncertainty caused investors to pay a premium for defensive safety of these sectors, and one could see these sectors decelerate going forward, and that could cause their valuation to drop a little bit. I'm not talking of a crash in their valuation, but I think their best phase in recent times is good as done. Varun Agarwal asks the next question. How do you, he says, how do you identify earnings growth in a particular sector? Well, you'll have to see the environment, and if there is investment, if there is massive investment in a sector, you will see earnings growth. You would have noticed if you drive out of the cities or the bigger into the bigger tier 2 or tier 3 towns, you will see the banking system expand dramatically. You'll see banks setting up branches in places which you have never imagined. Now, if infrastructure is being created in such places, it is but natural that earnings will come with a lag. So you have to look at sectors where the investment is complete, and that is how you identify earnings growth. If the investment is complete, then you have to bet on the payback. Mr. Muthukumar wants to know which parameters you would view top weightage, quality management versus average business sector, which may be taken based on value investing. Well, there is no compromise, Mr. Muthukumar, on the quality of management, because if the best of business has a bad management, you could end up losing. Corporate governance is non-negotiable, so that should be given top weightage. If you like a business, first I would look if I like a business or a sector. If I like a sector, I look at companies within the sector which I like. And when I look at the companies that I like, I look at them from the perspective of their business and the quality of their management. And once all these fall in place, then we can take them up for investment. Now, I will give you an interesting example. 4 years back, I found that it was a safe bet to buy the MNC funds. So the MNCs I found had much better corporate governance. In the light of the 2G scam, I was very, very uncomfortable investing in sectors where the Indian companies had baggage. So that was one of the reasons why we didn't invest in most of the infra companies. There are other reasons also, but that was one of the reasons. And when we are looking for safety, we found that multinational companies offered us that safe haven 4 years back. Not only that, they have given very good returns as well. So the quality of management is very, very important. Mr. Arvind wants to know, when do you think this valuation phase of stock market will peak out? How long are we away from this point? Well, it really depends on the monsoon, it depends upon the government, it depends upon the monetary policy, it depends upon three things. Now, if we have a decent monsoon and not as we are currently fearing, then this valuation phase could continue to stay in a range which is much higher than it was historically. Historically, the markets seem to be moving into higher ranges, so we should be getting more comfortable with higher ranges, otherwise we may end up selling early. Now, the question of peaking out is too early. A peaking out will happen only if there is euphoric behavior post-elections. Now, that is something which is a surmise. And how long are we away from this point? It depends upon how the markets react on 16th of May. Now, this is not a time when you think that valuations are extremely expensive. Save consumption, I think valuations are still very reasonable. Rajuel wants to know, can I sell real estate and invest the proceeds in equity? I would think that the two decisions have to be weighed independently. Real estate is at probably the highest point in the asset cycle, but just a notch below it. So it makes sense to reduce exposure to real estate if you are already overexposed. Investing the proceeds in equity should be a separate choice, depending upon how much exposure you are having at this point in time. If you have little or no exposure, it makes sense to increase your exposure. Lokesh Kumar wants to know, can you name some parameters of a great business? A great business will have loyal customers who are willing to do more business with it, who buy only its products, and a great business will be able to add customers at a rate much higher than other businesses. You will find in India there are at least a dozen companies that have been doing this consistently. Akash Jain wants to know, how do you use market PE to decide portfolio allocation? Example, cash percentage in portfolio goes up if market PE goes down, and why do you? Logically, Akash, when market PE goes down, cash in portfolio ought not to go up. I mean, I would do it the other way around, in the sense, I would reduce cash when PEs go down, because ultimately India is a growing economy and it's only a perception mismatch that creates PE to drop. When that perception gets set right, when the macros fall in place, we will always be a high PE market, because finding quality companies to fulfill our capital deployment need is always a challenge, which is why you find several consumption companies selling at 40 PE, because there is an appetite for good companies, you have fewer companies, and therefore the market pays a higher PE. So when the PE goes down, I would always buy better managed sectors or businesses. Anand Rajaram wants to know, is there any store of wealth that cannot be manipulated? Manipulation and wealth go hand in hand. Everything is manipulated. When governments reduce interest rates, it is also manipulation. When governments get into trouble, gold is manipulated by the market to put governments in a spot. Real estate again is one of the most prominent manipulation conducted by countries where there is a high element of crony capitalism. Manipulation will be there in all asset classes, and we must learn to skirt manipulation and steer clear. That's my answer to Anand Rajaraman. Sunandan wants to know, how do you see the market correcting the overvaluation in the real estate market given builders seldom cut prices? Well, Sunandan, the money which the builders are using to hold inventory is not theirs. It belongs to the banks. So if the banks tighten or close the tap, it's quite likely that builders will not be able to hold on for too long. You will realize that UPA 2 has been a story of banking playing its cards all wrong. If you see the problems of the PSU banks, it's clearly originating from two areas. One is politicians influencing loans to real estate, and the other is loans to businesses connected to politicians which have not done anything on the ground. So these two areas have basically caused the crisis in the PSU banking system. It's the banks that have created this situation, and it is they who have to bite the poison pill. And I don't see the new government giving banks more license to do more of what the UPA 2 did, because the consequences will leave so much blood in the hands of the new government that even the government will fall because of what they do. So we need a cleanup, and there is no alternative to that. And Ajit wants to know, what's your take on the shipping industry today? With China reducing trade and the overcapacity in shipping, shipping is going through one of its worst phases. But one must remember that shipping is one business where in every cycle ships are scrapped, capacity is reduced, and that's what always revives shipping. And we probably would go through that phase over a period of time. Srivats wants to know, do you think Sensex may touch 60,000 in the next 4 years, as some experts are predicting? Well, the numbers are very simple. You're starting at an earnings in the region of 1475 for the BSE Sensex. Now, if this earnings can go to 3,000, you can well, and the PE ratio is 20, you can see a Sensex of 60,000. But that is in the realm of speculation, because from 1475 to 3,000 is a long hop. It's several years of economic GDP growth, good governance, and confidence, public confidence in our country. So this is something that has to happen over a period of time. So one should not really look at 60,000 today. You look at the economy today, relative valuation, and what is attractive, and stick to that. Mr. Ganesh wants to know, do you think the market has run ahead of itself? Has the market already factored into the current valuations, or do you think there is still some steam left post-elections? What are the sectors one should take money off the table at this juncture? Mr. Ganesh, I would think that consumption is the sector where I would move money to some degree of safety. That's a sector where there is some overvaluation, and I would think even public sector banks is another area of concern. That's another area where I would move capital away. But has the market run ahead of itself? I won't think so, because if you look at large companies like TCS, and if you look at companies like HDFC Bank, which are probably performing stellar performance over the last few years, even in the worst of times, I think that the market is really not overvaluing them, because if you see the multiples, they're still in the region of 18 in the case of HDFC Bank. In the case of TCS, and it's hardly 14 in the case of HDFC Bank. That's not really an expensive valuation for a company which is providing market leadership. On the other hand, with a 0.5% profit growth, lot of treasury income, Reliance probably has run ahead, because where a company runs ahead is where there are political expectations getting factored in, and it's only that part of the market that has run ahead. On the one side you have consumption, and the other side you have crony capitalist companies that have run ahead. They probably may run even further ahead, because that's how speculation works. I would steer clear of such moves and stick to what we do best, which is identify parts of the market, sectors and funds which are managed in a way which skirts manipulation. What's your view on margin of safety? Asked Varun Agarwal. It's very, very important. Margin of safety is very, very important, but you will agree that there are two ways of looking at it. The Grahamian way is one, and I don't find people putting money based on the Grahamian margin of safety today. There is a strong case for that, but I don't see investors showing confidence. The margin of safety in the Buffett model is very subjective, and I find investors more than willing to afford a higher margin of safety like paint industries, Relaxo, Cera Sanitary. In many companies, I think markets are paying far ahead of what should be a conservative margin of safety, even calculated according to the Buffett model. Akash Jain would like to know more about our portfolio allocation principles. How do you decide between your best ideas? Well, how do you decide? We scale ideas gradually. We scale our sectoral investments gradually, and we bet on much longer cycles. So that's what we do. We don't make decisions which are big. We make several small decisions which lead to big decisions. And even one decision is broken into several small decisions. If I choose to buy banking, I'll probably buy it gradually and scale myself up. Mr. Ganesh wants to know what's your advice on MF asset allocation, debt funds, liquidity, equity. Well, this is a very interesting time where I find that debt funds are equally attractive. One should scale up debt fund books as well now, and that will work just as well. And if there is an euphoria in equity, I think that you should ignore equity for a short period of time and move and completely concentrate on debt funds for a period of time. That would be a good post-election strategy. At the moment, there still is room to buy equity in this phase leading up to the counting day. So this window of time should be used to become a little more aggressive on equity if you aren't already aggressive. Lokesh Kumar wants to know earnings are growing, but CFO is constant or declining. Then what do you mean by CFO? I think you should clarify that. Srivat, is the in equity investing will take a lead over other assets? I would think that over the next 3 years, equity will see a sharp return. I would be happier if money returns consistently over a period of time rather than the way it did in 2008 where people invested 1 year and then ran away. That's not going to help the investor or the markets. So equity investing will take a gradual lead, and I'm hoping and praying that the lead is gradual rather than euphoric. Rajabel wants to know what is your view on growth of real estate in the coming 5 years? Do you see any crash? Well, predicting crashes should be nobody's business, but I can tell you that valuations are definitely not attractive, and I would think that this is not the best of time to bet on growth in real estate as the industry is doing. I think builders are extremely stretched, and most builders have debt in excess of their lifetime earnings in their business, and that's not a good place to be. I've calculated the debt exposure of several builders in Chennai. I find that most of them have loans in the region of 500 and 1000 crores. I'm sure they don't know the number of zeros in the numbers that they carry. Lokesh says CFO cash flow from operations. It's very, very important. That's the only way you can identify whether a business is well run operationally. So that is very, very important. It is not growing. No, it's declining. I don't know where you see it declining. When the earnings grow, cash flow from operations should grow unless the businesses are investing in strategically in inventory or giving customers longer credit. Either ways, I think that when liquidity returns, the cash flow from operations is bound to improve. So you should see the circumstance in which it is declining and then take a call. It is company specific. Is there any substitute to earnings growth? There is a substitute to, how it depends upon where you get the earnings growth. If businesses find that it makes sense to invest for the future earnings growth, then they invest for growth. If they have no avenues, then they return the money to the shareholders, and incidentally, that is done through buyback, and even that leads to further earnings growth. You will find in times when companies don't have good avenues to invest, they return the money to us, and the earnings still grow because the equity is reduced, and they are carrying much lesser capital on their books. A couple of questions that are getting typed, and then I'll answer them. Mr. Ganesh would like, in the current scenario, what would be your advice on the optimum asset allocation model? Well, I would look at something like this. I would look at debt between 30 and 40%, equity between 30 and 40 according to the investor. I would look at probably 30 to 40% allocation in property and gold. That would be a broad asset allocation, but it has to be customized according to the individual requirement, the age of the person. But I would think that one's equity exposure should gradually move closer towards, at least towards 30%, if it's lower than that at this point in time. And as things get better, you will see it rise by performance. Keeping it too low now doesn't make much sense. Debt should quickly go towards your target allocation, which should definitely be in the region of 30 to 40. And that is my answer to you, Mr. Ganesh. If there are no questions, I'd like to thank all of you for being a part of this webinar. It's an initiative that we are taking up to maintain this constant dialogue with investors. It's much easier for you to interact through this medium. We would request you to spread the word to your friends. We have a recording of this webinar which we will be putting up on social media. They could see what we have discussed with you. And I'm thankful to each of you for being a part of this webinar. We still have 3 people typing questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. At the end of it, we will close the webinar. The Kavita wants to know what is the current interest rate for debt funds. How is it better than fixed deposit? See, the fundamental thing is fixed deposit come under full tax rate, and there are debt products where you get the benefit of indexation. So if you earn 9% in a fixed deposit, you will pay 30% tax. On the other hand, if you invest it in a FMP or in a debt fund, your tax rate will drop much. It will go to 6-7% or even lower, which is a big advantage. And incidentally, the money is invested in the same place. It goes through the banks. So it makes sense to invest in debt through debt fund rather than through fixed deposit. Another important point is that if interest rates go down, you will be hurt in fixed deposits, whereas there is a prospect that you will make more money, better returns in debt funds, because whenever interest rates go down, there are debt funds which will give you much higher returns. Rajvel wants to know what are the first 5 equity scripts that an investor should hold for long term or for more than years. We have discussed 5 scripts in this presentation. I will be posting it. These are companies which provide great market leadership. The names are all obvious. You have TCS, you have HDFC Bank. You have so many good companies. I think one should stick to the leaders in these spaces. And whenever they become cheaper, you should buy them slowly. Just rushing to buy them may not work because that will lower your returns. Since you are a long-term investor, you should buy them when they are being thrown away by the market. Thank you, Rajabir. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for spending time on this webinar. We do plan to have more webinars. This webinar was to give our insights into what we expect in 2015. You will notice that we have not talked about what we expect in 2014 because we feel that you should look at a slightly longer investment horizon. Subsequent webinars, we plan to also have more educative content and more interactive programs, and I would invite you to continue to participate in them, spread the word. Thank you very much.